Good morning, everybody. How are you doing? Morning. That was better than you last time. Perfect. So first of all, first promise, I won't give a lecture. Second promise, I won't ask questions about the book you found yesterday in your room. But, as you said, I would like to inspire you, number one. Number two, I would like to bring you all at the same page for the so important topic of business ecosystems. Why? Because I'm really passionate about that on the one hand, but also because I really think, and we saw that at the beginning of, you make the difference. And that's so important also for this topic. If you think that's the future, and I hope you will think so at the end of my speech, that you can really move the needle, and that's why I think it's important to bring you here at the same page. So what we do at the early beginning, we start with a quick voting, because I would like to know what you already know about ecosystems. And in order to do so, I please you to scan this barcode and just to fill in the poll. And it's like the Net Promoter Score. It's from 1 to 10. 1 is, hey, this topic of ecosystems, I haven't heard about it. I'm absolute beginner. And 10, hey, I'm almost a professional. Maybe you have read the book overnight. Maybe some of you have. No, I don't think so. Anyway, so please fill in this poll. And so we will see where you are today. And I think here, when it's finished, it will pop up here at the screen. That's it. Oh, you see, you're actually kind of in the middle. So there are, of course, a couple of beginners. There's actually no 10, but so you're already kind of in the middle of the ecosystem game, which is good. So perfect. So let's get started. So first of all, let's go back to this. Why am I here? Because, as I said, I have been doing research for the last 10 years about transformation, about strategy, and in particular about business ecosystems. This is a big buzzword, and I was driven by how can you cut the elephant into pieces? How can you create management frameworks which help to step into the ecosystem game? And I did that not in the ivory tower of research. I did that with many companies together, and I would like to share some of these experiences in the next half an hour. First of all, lifting up the helicopter 10,000 miles up in the air. PwC every year asks CEOs for the Global Economic Forum in Davos, they ask a lot of questions, but one of them is, are you prepared for the future? The question of the questions. I mean, we had that right now. And the answer is, if you look at that statistics here, that there are a lot of CEOs who don't feel comfortable in terms of prepared for the future with their business model. You can see, okay, the Germans, actually it increased, but on a lower level. So maybe we are still too comfortable here, but that's a different story. But basically, all in all, you can see here, there's urgency to think about how can I actually cope with all that what is going out there. And I'm not talking only about tariffs and geopolitics, it's more also the business itself which is changing. And of course there are a couple of reasons for that. Some of them you know, some of them maybe not, but what we have here, on the one hand, of course, we have market saturation. Of course, you have a growth story here, so that's a good one. On the other hand, you have many markets where you only can win in niches which are saturated, where you have new kids on the block from the startup tech player side, and so you have to cope with that. Number two, increasing sector conversions, which is, I think, the key driver for ecosystems. I mean, you were talking about mobility. In the past, you would say, hey, we are in a much smaller market, so we are maybe just in the automotive after-sales market, but it's mobility already. Same with healthcare companies. If you ask a hospital, then they are also in the business of well-being, not that they are just competing against hospital A or B, or insurance company, same thing. So you can see this kind of sector convergence which actually addresses new ways of thinking, or which requires new ways of thinking. Often, of course, Jens mentioned that, stick to the core on the one hand, but sometimes also that creates barriers for the new one, barriers for innovation. And last but not least, you will talk about customer centricity all days, as all other companies also do. Nevertheless, the question is, can you even do better there? Because there are maybe some competitors which are quicker, faster, which are more customer-centric. So all of these barriers or all of these factors can lead to these numbers that companies have to react. So now, when we look now into the future, and I did that, of course, even as a professor, you're not wiser than others, but you can do that with some kind of techniques. And we did that together with PwC in a global study, which was recently published. So how will the future look like in 2030, which is also important for you, as you mentioned that as your time horizon. And all in all, if you really put everything together, all the data, what you can do with future research, this is kind of the result. And there are 3 or 4 important aspects. Number 1, the world is getting more and more digital. That's a no-brainer. Second, the world is getting even more and more connected. This is also, you can imagine that, but the thing is here that we think everything will be connected. Every car will connect with another car, with traffic lights, with roads, with people. And we already have that in Asia and some Asian smart cities, partly, but this will be the standard. And number 3, and that is where we all have to work for, it has to be sustainable. So we need to actually fulfill the ecological transformation, all of us. And if you put all of that together and ask how to get there, you end up with ecosystems, you end up with collaboration, because that's only possible if companies are collaborating together. That's not possible for one single company. And on the other hand, that are business opportunities. If you're there, a leader, the first one, or if you're like moving the needle to push our economy in general towards this future. So now, and I promise it's the only definition, because we were talking about ecosystem, and now what is my definition? What do you think, what is an ecosystem? Here you can read it. A dynamic and largely independent set of players that complement each other to create interconnected offerings which have more value when consumed as one integrated experience. So what are here the keywords? On the one hand, there are more companies also outside your boundaries who create value, number 1. Second, it's the interconnected offering once again. So we were talking about new products. The question is, how do you make them smart? How do you connect them also to others? How do you integrate them into customer experiences? That's the second issue, and that's just not possible if you're just thinking inside out. And number 3, it's the experience. And the experience is not just the UX, where to push the button, where to click the button. It's the solution. It's that you solve problems either for your direct customers or even for the end customer, for the human. And you will learn that in a second, why I think that is important and relevant. So now, having said the basics, what is now the starting point for most of the companies? And you can see that here. The starting point is often you have products. You have great products, which you sell in various markets now, or services. And now you add value-add services, also nothing new. You were talking about platforms, and that is the next stage. So where can you create platforms, either to aggregate demand or to create value? That's the third. And number 4, that is then the ecosystem that you put services from others on your platform. And to get kind of a metaphor, what is the difference between the platform and the ecosystem? Imagine the platform is the dance floor in a nightclub, but without the ingredients like good drinks, people dancing, great conversations, of course some good drinks, some good music, there won't be a great party. So what you have to do is to bring all these ingredients together. That means to have this platform, the products, but also the ingredients from the others, maybe also from your customers, to lock them in, and that actually the ecosystem is really worthwhile and is long-lasting. That is basically not the magic, but that is the fundamental behind moving from product to an ecosystem era. Now, how to get there and what is important here. And it's all about, and if there's one key takeaway, it's the way of thinking. And if you look out there to frame it in a very simple model, you have 3 perspectives. The industry perspective is the perspective you all know, because that's your home turf. You're good at, you know your friends, your enemies, you know your products, and so on and so forth. The customer perspective also, once again, we can argue, is it the end of the road? Not, but you also know that. But there's a third perspective, and this is the perspective where you often have boundaries because you think it's just not possible. We cannot do it, so let's leave it. Then we don't do it. And that's the ecosystem. That's actually the power of others, the power of the many. And now you put all that together, and then you end up with a sweet spot. So my call for action is here. Think about in these 3 dimensions, so customer, industry, and ecosystem, And there you can actually find potentially new opportunities. Of course, that's high level, and we will drill that down in a second, but that's the basic understanding of how to get there in the ecosystem economy. Now, also to give some proofs. If you look out at visions of companies, in that case, of course, it's your vision, but it's also the vision of some of your competitors. In the past, they were very much technocratic and product-driven. And now, and in the future, we see more and more visions which have more this kind of human-centric aspect, creating value around our products and our markets, next generation of mobility. Of course, you can say, hey, that's marketing, blah, blah. On the one hand, it's truth. On the other hand, the question is, what's actually derived from these visions? And we are currently running a research project where, with AI, we are trying to analyze not only like these 4 visions and strategies, but from thousands of companies in order to find out what has changed over the years. So like your time horizon from 2010 to 2025. And like the first results we had is that the most successful companies so far, once again, it's not yet finished, yeah, but they have started with visions which were very much like product-centric, very much, let's say, market-driven. We want to be number 1 in this market or that market, and which have evolved now into visions and missions which are more from these kind of style. And although the strategies behind, they substance that. So once again, this is just only to give you the feeling where the world is heading. And of course, you have to fill that with life. Yeah? You have to create strategies and projects below the visions, but that's kind of the direction of travel. And to put that in a very simple chart, what is going on there, also based on our research, is that the world in the past was very much like on the left, like 80s, like all of you who have done MBA classes and were taught Porter and all the other management frameworks from the 80s. That's the left side, and that was very successful in the past to run markets because you had market entry barriers. So everything was clear. You just had to gain new markets and grow in other areas with your current business, with your current setup. So that's the left side. Now that is changing. It gets a little bit more blurry. You get like cross-industry opportunities. You get all these orange dots where there are opportunities you don't know if they really will gain a lot of business in the future. But if you don't address them, maybe others will do. So that's kind of the new reality, and you have to cope with that. Now, how to do so? Because this is still high level, and now of course, I'm often asked, now give me the recipe, so what to do? What are the 5 steps, especially C-level is asking me that. And of course, that's just not possible, but what I can do is at least to show you some ingredients, which I think are important, and I also show you what you are doing already there in that case. So what are the ingredients for successful ecosystem business models? On the one hand, it's thinking human-centric, thinking holistically. So where are the real problems in life, even if you're a B2B company, and how can you fulfill them, even if you're not like being an end customer company, but thinking in these terms. So that's the number 1, and you will see that also in a second when we look at the framework. Number 2, it's the business model thinking. Of course, you had very much success with your products, but at the end of the day, it's more. It's the question, where can you make money? Where can you involve others? So what is actually the ingredient of around your products where you can make money? Number 3, what is your role? Also, that is the question. Are you the leader in an ecosystem, or is it maybe sometimes even more worthwhile to jump into an ecosystem of others which is already there, and you also can make a lot of money? So there's no, let's say, number 1 strategy. It's always like case by case, and you have to carefully select what to do. That's number 3. Number 4, it's of course about data. I think there won't be any business model, any success without collecting data, analyzing data, and making much out of data. Probably you're doing that already. Nevertheless, the question is, for each new business model, when we are doing workshops with companies, we always ask, so where is the data layer in your business model? So how can you make that long-lasting? So this is something which is not in the DNA of most companies if you're not a software or tech company. So that is really, really important. So that's this one. And last but not least, I explained that it's the experience. Once again, I repeat that. That's the number 2 key takeaway here next to the mindset. Really think in which problems can you solve? What is the experience you create in terms of a solution? That's important. And the last thing is then also how to monetize that. That's for sure. So that are kind of some of the ingredients. Maybe they sound a little bit technocratic, but now let's fill them with life. So what are you doing already? Because, of course, you're not starting by zero. So you already have something you bring to the table. And we just picked out here 3 examples. Of course, let's take the field of battery. Very important field now in the ecological transformation when we talk about e-vehicles. So you're already involved in, you mentioned that, in a startup, and you already are collaborating here, and you're thinking about like extending that space here. Number 2, rep expert. I saw some t-shirts at the breakfast from colleagues of you. So you're already here in this field of training diagnostics and platforms. And I think that is definitely a future field, because there you are getting closer to the customer, you're learning, you get data, you're getting more into the service business here. And of course, it's also to connect the user journey, to really think in these experiences I mentioned. So here, what you can see here, I think, you're already there. You have a good starting point to continue with ecosystem thinking and ecosystem business modeling. Now, some examples. Before later I will explain how to even get there even more, but some examples from some companies, and small ones and big ones. Anybody knows Kerber? Or here in the room, Kerber, here? Kerber is it's a company almost from your size, 3 billion, a little bit less, but they are very keen in ecosystem, because the CEO is a big fan also from ecosystem thinking, and he said it's not just a tool, it's also not just that we are thinking about that to integrate ecosystem thinking in our products, it should be our DNA. So he's convinced that, by the way, he's in the supply chain service business, I have to say that. And so he said, hey, we have to collaborate for each of our new services with suppliers, with software companies, with robot companies. So for him, that's kind of the starting point for all new business. And that's why he put that into the agenda for the management meetings and for all kind of the strategic dialogue for all his managers. And you can see here already, he's also thinking in life areas, not just in business fields, but he's thinking about mobility, health, work, consumption. You will learn that in a second, because that's part of our methodology. So learnings for you is think beyond, think that could be part of your DNA also in the future, even if you also, of course, have to focus on your current business. I'm not telling you that you have to get rid of that, but that's kind of an additional way of thinking, and he's doing it very, very passionately and also very, very much driving forward. Another one you all know is NVIDIA. Of course, NVIDIA is famous for producing high-end chips for AI. That's what we all know. But what probably some of you don't know is that in terms of looking into the future, NVIDIA is just thinking about integrating their knowledge into some other industries, some other life areas. For instance, healthcare. It's not that they are just a supplier of chips. They want to create and enable breakthroughs in medicine. They want to improve patient care. No, it's more that they want to benefit from the growth and the transformation in particular industries. And it's not just one industry, and that's interesting here with NVIDIA. Of course, they have a generic product, so they are also in many industries. Healthcare is just one example. And so that is also one other way of thinking how to address new markets. So that is, of course, you can say, hey, they have billions of money. That makes the story much more easier. True. But once again, I think this kind of mentality and mindset can be applied also to your areas, or also to our other areas. So now, how to get there? Now I have raised some examples and some context. Now the question is how to get there. And what I would like to show you in the next 10 minutes is a framework I created together with more than 1,000 practitioners. So what we did, we did research, we talked to many, many managers in the past few years and asked them, how actually can you start with that thinking? And the starting point is, as you can see here on the left, it's human-centric thinking. Start with the human. Start with the human, and that's what is important in our lives. Next thing is, combine that with ecosystem thinking. Combine that with roles you can play in the life of human being. And then think about where are the business opportunities? Which are the domains? Which are the topic fields which are relevant in human life and where you can make a difference? And last but not least, of course, think about the business model. How can you actually make money? What is the real opportunity? How are the mechanisms behind? What is realistic in a different time frame? And so on and so forth. Then that are the details. So that's basically the process. On the one hand, sounds simple, but of course it isn't. So here is a starting point. So first of all, starting point is you have the human here, which is here on the right, and then you have different roles. Let's take here the life area of mobility. So the question is, how far are you away from the human? If you're very close to the human, you can be an orchestrator, like Google Maps, like Amazon, or like also small digital platforms which help humans guiding or like which provide humans a guide through their life. You can be a realizer. Then that means you have products for us. It could be a vehicle, but it could be also a car repair shop who is also a realizer because it provides a service for us as humans. And then you can be an enabler that are all the B2B companies. Could be you, could be software companies, could be other suppliers. So that's kind of the way of organizing the world on the one hand in life areas, 10 life areas, you will see them in a second, and roles. And now let's have an example. The question is here, who's a guitar player here in the room? You know Fender? You have a Fender guitar? Okay, you know, so I'm absolutely not an expert in music, so my career ended with a xylophone in the preschool. But so you're more an expert. But Fender is a great example because why? Fender is not like Nvidia or Apple, a big company, just 750 million. But what they really did smartly is that they created this experience around their customers. They started with producing guitars. Jimmy Fender, by the way, is kind of the creator of the e-guitar. So it's for you, it's kind of an icon. But in terms of business, the first thing they did is they created a tuning app. A tuning app in order to find out who's good and who's a beginner, who's a professional. So it's a good way of segmenting customers. So there you can think, okay, what could be the next step? Of course, maybe the beginners, they need teaching. But Fender is not a company who has guitar teachers on stock. So what they did is they connected the beginners with guitar teachers which are out there. So either online or offline. Next, they connected their fans and their target group with organizers of concerts. So also to enrich the experience. So you can see the most famous bands and the most famous singers using Fender guitars and bring them to the community. And so on and so forth. So the starting point was hardware, guitar, and then they extended step by step their business model towards experiences to create lock-in effects. Because imagine, what happens after 10 years if you want to buy a new guitar? Then obviously you will think twice or even more times if it's not a Fender, if you are locked into this ecosystem. And so this is the mechanism to think about where can you create this kind of small lock-in effects that your customers or the customers of your customers even can create these lock-in effects to make money and to be happy with your product and with your experience in this entire setup. So that's this here. Now, coming back to your business. And of course, you would say a Fender guitar, that's an emotional market, so we cannot compare. That's what I often hear. But I don't think so. I really think that also in your business and in many other businesses, the mechanisms behind are at least not the same, but you can adapt them. Of course, you have integration. You also are moving further down the supply chain towards the end customers. The question is, where does it make sense and where not? What is the end? But still, you have to have that in mind. And number three, of course, it's software and data. And so there is a really big opportunity, and we are not talking yet about AI here. That's still another topic to enrich that and to speed that up. But basically, also your business has, from the outside, the same conditions as many markets I have seen, where this logic of experience ecosystem thinking can really benefit. So take that opportunity. Now, coming back to one example also, which is then in your field, but from a broader level, let's take Ola Källenius here as Mercedes-Benz CEO. He also has the same problem, because he sells cars, luxury cars, but he has no direct customer contact. So what he did is, he partnered with Salesforce to get a better understanding of customer data. And kind of the end game is to have a direct relationship, a more direct relationship to the end customers. Of course, others also will do, and I will show you one example where actually he's trying to approach that. Of course, Mercedes-Benz is experimenting a lot with some services. Some of them are nitty-gritty, some of them, they disappear, but it's the way that Mercedes-Benz, as other car makers, are trying to create experiences within the car, but also around the car. And so one example is here, smart energy. Of course, it's very close to the imagination that, of course, if you have e-vehicles, you also are close to the energy market. Tesla is actually performing that already for years, so Mercedes-Benz is following here. And so Mercedes-Benz said, okay, we don't have competency here, but we have Bosch or others, that's just an example, to collaborate here and to tap into this energy field. And so the conversations here at Mercedes-Benz is, how can you get closer to the home of your clients? That's actually a different life area. If you remember that, they are not only in mobility, but now they are in living. And now the question is, what does make sense? Where maybe they think too big, and that are always the discussions you have here. But I will show you in a second, if you look at other companies here, and once again, that's just high level, we have analyzed here some of the players. And you can see here, if you look at this strategy map, Tesla already is very much deep into living due to energy, but also in entertainment with gaming. Tesla provides games. Tesla is developing games together with others because they want to benefit, on the one hand, from the growing gaming market, but also, of course, when you have time, we are talking about robots and autonomous driving, autonomous delivery here. So, of course, then gaming is one alternative you can do. You can perform while sitting in the traffic jam or sitting in the car in general. And if you see here, the other players, also new kids on the block, I mean, you could say they are crazy because they are doing everything. They are producing a phone with partners. They are like in living with flats with their brand. And so they put their brand on almost everything. And I was talking to the general director of Europe during the last IAA. And he said, yeah, Julian, it's true. Maybe we are crazy, but we are the new kids on the block. We have to do it differently. We don't know if we will succeed, but that's our single alternative to get into that market with very much experience-driven offerings, and not just with a car which is maybe a little bit worse than Tesla or Mercedes-Benz. Nobody will buy it, yeah? So we need to do so. And that's actually here the different step. And now, coming to you, what will be your future? Today, you're on the left side. Your core is, of course, in mobility. I put also you a little bit into education with training, you could argue here, but very limited here. And now the question is, what could be the steps with this ecosystem thinking in the future? On the one hand, of course, you can think about how to get closer to the human. On the other hand, you can also think about how to use data in that game and how to maybe also move into other life areas. What is for sure is when you look at the right side of this picture, then I think our life, once again, it comes back to that what I said, our life will be, in a few years, will be totally integrated. And so for us, it doesn't matter who is actually solving our problems. It's just, it should be solved. And the question is then, what does it mean for competition? What does it mean for collaboration? And I think, if you ask me, then it's so important to identify also the brands, the other brands, which make the difference in our lives, which fit to our lifestyles, and which then solve the problems which will be there in our lives. And so that's why that's on the right, these logos, they are just artificial. So it's not the recommendation, please collaborate with all these companies. It's more that you really have to think about what is your positioning in that game. And of course, it's always the question between focus and innovation distraction. Yeah? So but that will be the thing you have to manage in the future. So that's my absolute persuasion that here you really have to think about what is here your final positioning or your positioning. So now, where are you now? I mean, the good thing is you already identified thinking about cross-mobility, thinking in mobility ecosystems. That's, by the way, a picture from your slide deck. And I think that's really so important to start that, because if you ask me, working together with a lot of companies, it takes time. So for you, maybe it still sounds a little bit abstract because you are successful with your products. You demonstrate that. The track record is, hey, now we have a new organization. We have this matrix, we have these markets, and of course it's product portfolio. And of course, please continue. I'm not saying leave that out and change that. I'm just saying add this new perspective, because I think the winners will be who get more and more into this holistic thinking, and it's like a little bit try and error based on that what you have today. So that's, I think, what is important. And with ending, I have brought you this guy here, and I'm asking you, who is that? Ed Sheeran. So Why Ed Sheeran here as a closing remark? Because Ed Sheeran is not only one of the most famous and most successful singers on earth, but he's also a smart businessman, because in a certain way, he also integrates ecosystem thinking into his setup. Look, that's one of his latest albums. And here it's not an album with 20 or 30 tracks just from Ed Sheeran. So he invited some other famous singers like 50 Cent, like Eminem and others. I don't know, maybe you or your kids know them better than I do, but that's number one. So he's integrating demand with others. Then, of course, he's selling that album not only via his own channels exclusively, but also via the channels of the others, of course, via Spotify. So he's growing the pie. And that's another thing. So it's not just I have to take all the market shares. It's more I can grow the pie, and then even my market share could be bigger than before when I have this mentality. Once again, I know a little bit abstract on the one hand. On the other hand, it should today, my goal number one was to show you a little bit of this, let's say, of this additional thinking, which then, of course, you have to integrate also into your daily and operative questions, and so, of course, strategic questions. And I think this Ed Sheeran is a great example for that. So my call for action is become the Ed Sheeran of the after-sales market in the future. And with that having said, I would like to conclude with just some of the key takeaways before we have time for questions. So what did we learn? First of all, markets are evolving into ecosystems more and more. Sometimes we see that, sometimes we're just about to start. Number two, it's these three perspectives. Industry, customer, probably yes. Also, ecosystem is the additional one. So here, please feel free to enrich your knowledge and adapt this knowledge also into your daily decisions. Number three, it's the human-centric thinking. Once again, also abstract for having B2B mindset for all the years, but I think that will also be the future. So it's not just one industry, you need to think across industries. Number four, it's the partnerships and the experience, but not, once again, only from the UX part, from the solution part. And number five, it's choose the domains. And Jens, you were talking about that. So of course, maybe we have to step into other fields, maybe we have to step out in fields we are now in. And that's also kind of the new normal. Maybe it's difficult sometimes, of course, you have also burn money sometimes, but imagine this picture we had with the industry, cross-industry. This is, I think, it's just, there's no alternative. So it's the way of thinking you have to do, and you have to train that like a muscle. You have to train when you do exercises. And so I would like to finish with a last call for action. So it's the mindset. I don't read that, but when there's one thing which should remain, and of course you can read the book some more, but when it's just one thing which should remain today, it's think about that mindset. It needs time, but I think it's really worth it. And with that having said, thank you for listening, and now ready for questions.